Hi everyone, I'm Gertie, and I am so excited to be bringing you our first in a series of pattern hack videos. Now, this is a special new reward for our Princess and Inner Circle members this year. And we got the idea to do these pattern hacks from you, really, because you've been requesting them. And also because when I did the League of Our Own uniform hack for Halloween last year, I was amazed by how many of you followed it and loved it and said you learned a lot from it. So I'm thinking that this can be a great series of tutorials which sort of takes you on an educational journey, which you know I love to do, where we will start with the foundational skills of pattern, alterations, hacks, and really beginning pattern drafting. So I'm really excited that we are going to start with a robe hack of the society dress, which is again something that you requested. This was our January pattern for the Society of Charm, and I've seen so many of you make this pattern, and some of you have requested a zip front as well. So the great news is what we're going to do today is we're going to alter the society dress pattern to be a zip front robe with a zipper guard. So I'm going to show you how to change the pattern pieces and then how to do the sewing as well. So for this project, I was inspired by 40s and 50s Hollywood glamour. I saw pictures of Hedy Lamarr, Marlene Dietrich wearing long glamorous robes and loungewear. And then I was thinking too of Marilyn Monroe wearing that adorable white terry robe in How to Marry a Millionaire. So lots of great Hollywood inspiration for this one. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start by talking about the pattern pieces and then we'll get into the pattern adjustments. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the pattern pieces and which ones we're going to be working with today. If you are not familiar with the society dress and the pattern pieces and how it's constructed, I would definitely suggest that you go back to January's video for the society dress, because I talk more in that video about all the different possibilities. There are different sleeves, different skirts, etc., and how to sew them. But today I'm just going to be talking about the pieces that we're using for this hack. So on the table here, I have all the pieces I'm going to be using because I'm doing the floor length skirt, I'm doing the bishop sleeve, and I'm doing a hood. I'm going full 40s glamour on this one. So I'm doing the most dramatic version I could think of. And I am going to be cutting out my fabric in all of these pieces as usual, but the pattern adjustments I'm only going to be making on 4 pieces, okay? So you don't have to worry about the sleeves, about the hood. You don't have to worry about the skirt back or the godets. Midriff back, don't have to worry about the bodice back. These are the pieces that we are going to be focusing on in the center here. So piece number 1, the bodice front. Piece number 3, the midriff front. 12, the floor length skirt front. And then 8, the front neck facing. So essentially what we're going to be doing is creating an opening at the center front, down the center front here. We are going to be adding a zipper guard, which is an entirely new piece we're going to be drafting. And then we are going to be adjusting the front facing so that it extends down to the hem of the skirt. Okay, so you're gonna need all of the pieces to make the floor length dress version, if that's the one you wanna make. But like I said, you could make this the day dress, you know, short sleeves, short skirt, zipper up the front, and just make it more casual, or for breastfeeding. I know people are always asking about that. But these are the pieces I'm going to be using today. So just 4 pieces we're going to be focusing on. Okay, so next we're going to talk about fabric and supplies, and then we'll get into making our pattern adjustments. Okay, so let's talk fabric and supplies. So for the robe, you know, I got very taken by the Marilyn Monroe white terry cloth version and How to Marry a Millionaire. So I knew I wanted to do a sort of white terry version. Now you need to stick with the same stretch recommendations as for the society dress, which is at least 50% stretch in the widthwise direction. So Don't be like me. I initially ordered terry cloth without stretch and then it arrived and I realized it's not going to work at all. It's basically toweling fabric. So I found something better, which is, this is a modal blend terry cloth and it has stretch in it. It's from Blue Moon Fabrics, where we get a lot of our stretch fabrics from. So this is going to be great for the body of the robe. And then I had ordered these samples from them as well with this, these are amazing, this fishnet that stretch with little rhinestones on each little intersection here. And I got it in my head that it would be amazing to do some accents on the robe, to go very old Hollywood glamour with this. So to layer these two together. So you're gonna see me doing that in a few places. But you could just do the terry cloth if you want more of an everyday robe, right? And just so you know, the fishnet comes in a lot of amazing colors. This is a baby blue, red, and then a little pale pink. So think about what you could layer just for some extra glamour on this robe if you want. The other thing we started thinking about was sequins, because how amazing would it be to, you could do the whole robe in a sequin jersey, or you could just do the sleeves or something like that. But I will warn you that, sequins can be a little scratchy on the back. So you may want to add a thin jersey lining to whatever pieces you're doing in sequins, if you have sensitive skin. Okay, so that is your fabric. And then for interfacing, we're going to need some interfacing. I would recommend a stretch, like a lightweight tricot or stretch interfacing, something like that for your zipper guard, for your facings. And then we're also going to stabilize the center front opening of the robe where we put the zipper in. So as you know, I like to use these rolls of 1¼ inch wide fusible interfacing, but you can just as easily cut 1¼ inch wide strips from your fusible yardage. Okay, so that is your interfacing. You're also going to need stretch needles, of course, for your fabric. Match the size of your needle to your fabric weight. And then finally, you will need a separating zipper. And the length is really up to you. We are going to adapt the pattern for whatever length zipper we're using. I would recommend measuring on your body from a V-neck down to where you want the robe opening to be. You can go very risque with a shorter zipper, or you could have this be more demure and cozy with a knee-length zipper, right? So I'm gonna be using 20 so that I can get a little bit of a slit at the top, but still have good coverage. But like I said, you can adapt this to whatever you want this robe to be. So there's your zipper. Oh, and this one has nylon teeth, but I did find some on Amazon, which I just ordered. You can have little gold or brass teeth, which would be really pretty on this because the teeth are going to be exposed when we sew it, just the teeth, not the tape itself. So think about that. Think about if you want a specialty zipper. Zippers come in all sorts of fancy iterations, like rainbow teeth and stuff like that. So this could be a fun place to play around with that. Okay, so let's get started with our pattern alterations. Okay, so let's get started with altering our pattern pieces. Like I said in the intro, we are really focusing on foundational skills for pattern making and pattern drafting here. So you're gonna need a few pattern making supplies. I love these 2x18 clear gridded rulers. So that's all we're gonna be using today, ruler wise. And then you'll want some pencils. It's nice to have some in a variety of colors when you're doing pattern making too, just if you do different lines that you want to differentiate from each other. You will want to have some tape, paper scissors, and then some extra paper. I'm using pattern making paper, which has these, some people call it dot and cross paper because it has the numbers and these little crosses on it. But you don't have to use pattern making paper. You could use some scrap paper from your printer and tape it together. You could use butcher block paper. I know some people use like medical, that kind of tissuey paper. So whatever you like to use, you just need some paper to work with to extend our pattern pieces. Okay, so like I said, we're only gonna be working with 4 pattern pieces today. And I am looking at the bodice front and then the midriff front. So we're going to start by adding a seam allowance to the center front of the midriff. Now, the bodice front, you actually don't need to do anything to it because it already has a seam allowance at the center front, right? So remember that if the dress has a V-neck, there's a seam right here on the center front. Then it goes into the midriff, which does not have a seam on it, okay? So with piece number 1, you can just put it to the side. You don't need to do anything to it because you can see it's bigger than this midriff piece because of the gathers, but also because it has a seam allowance of 5/8 of an inch included at center front. Okay, so put that to the side. Now we are going to add a seam allowance to piece number 3. And this is just a great thing to know how to do in general. Maybe you've already done it. Just add a seam line to something that doesn't have one. I'm just gonna get a little bit of scrap paper, cut off here. And I am going to tape this piece down so that I have some room to work with where I'm adding the seam line. I'm going to take my gridded ruler, and I will use this kind of burgundy color here. And so the grids are great for adding however many 1/8 of an inch you want to add, okay? So I'm counting 5/8, and I'm aligning that 5/8 of an inch line with the center front of the piece, making sure that it's straight all the way down so that I'm creating a line that is exactly parallel at 5/8 of an inch to the piece, okay? So that is our seam allowance, but we have to connect the lines at the lower edge and the upper edge. So I'm just going to take the ruler again, and you want this to be at a right angle with the center front here. So I'm aligning here horizontally and then just extending that line over. And with this pointed edge here, I'm gonna do the same thing. See how I'm aligning my ruler with the cut line, and I'm extending up like this. Okay, so that is how you would add your seam allowance to your midriff front. Very simple. Like I said, we're starting with foundational skills. You may have already known how to do that, but maybe you didn't, and you learned something new. All right, so the next thing I like to do is you're gonna have some flaps on the back here, so I like to just because it drives me crazy, I will tape that down, and then this piece is ready. Now, you're gonna wanna do the same thing with your skirt front. So whether you're using the knee length skirt or the floor length skirt, you're going to need to add 5/8 of an inch to the skirt front. And this is a big piece. It's probably going off the edge of the camera here. So I'm going to do this on my own. You're gonna do the same thing with your skirt front, but it's the exact same thing. I'm gonna need a nice and long piece that's as long as the center front of my skirt, or you can tape together if you don't have a long enough piece, and add 5/8 of an inch all the way down, and then fill in the gaps at the top and bottom of the piece, okay? So do that, and then we'll come back and talk about the next part. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we are going to adjust our front neckline facing. Right now, it just extends to the bottom of the midriff, to the bottom of the bodice, right? So where it connects to the midriff, but we want it to go all the way down to the bottom of the skirt now, right? Because it's gonna be finishing that entire front opening where the zipper is going to go. Okay, so piece number 8 is the front neck facing, and this essentially needs to become a floor length piece. So we're gonna be adding to it the amount we need. So the first thing you need to do is figure out how much length you need to add to the piece. So on the midriff, I'm gonna measure the center front, but I'm going to remove the seam allowances from that measurement. So I'm just drawing in the 5/8 of an inch seam line here at the top and at the bottom. And this is a great thing to know how to do too. Just anytime you need to measure a seam line, right? You're gonna take away those seam allowances, and then I'm going to turn my ruler the correct way, and then I'm going to measure the center front seam line, right? I'm not measuring the cut line, I'm measuring the actual seam line here. So for the size I'm making from top to bottom, that is 5¼ inches. So I'm just going to make a note of that. And then the next thing I'm going to do is well, I would do this if the piece weren't so gigantic, but you're just going to imagine I'm doing it. I'm going to do the same thing with the skirt front, right? I'm going to mark in the seam line at the top of the piece, but not at the bottom, right? Because we want to include that seam allowance at the bottom. So I'm going to mark in the seam allowance line at the top at 5/8 of an inch and then measure from there down to the bottom edge of the piece. And whatever measurement you get, take a note of it. And then I'm going to show you how to start the process of extending your facing piece the length you need. Okay, so you're going to need a lot. It's going to become a very long facing piece, right? So you're going to need a lot of paper, but just skinny strips of it so you can cut it as needed. So I'm going to, my grain line goes this way, and you are going to want to retain the same grain line when you cut it, just so that I can use this paper to its best advantage. I'm going to kind of tape it this way, and then we're going to extend the piece down. So one thing we're going to need to do is to remove the seam allowance from the bottom of this piece, right? Because there's no longer going to be a seam line on the facing here. So I am going to come up 5/8 of an inch. I'm going to mark here. And this is where I'm going to start adding. Okay, so now that I've drawn in this seam line, you can see that it's angled here, and the bottom of the skirt is not angled. So we need to do a little bit of zhuzhing here to straighten this out. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab a different color pencil, and I am going to use this center front of the facing as my vertical line. And then I'm going to align it with the grid of the ruler and draw a right angle. All right, so I'm just straightening out the bottom of the facing. And now I'm going to extend from this line that I just made down the full length that I need for the midriff front and the skirt front. So just to revisit my measurements, I needed 5¼ inches for the midriff, and then I measure the skirt and I need 44½ inches total. So this is going to be a really long facing piece. Before I do that, let me talk a little bit more about the grain line. So we're going to get rid of this old grain line, and then I'm going to draw a new one that is parallel to the center front of the facing. So again, just aligning the grid of my ruler with the center front, and then drawing a line. I'm drawing mine at 1/2 inch, but you can from the edge, but it doesn't really matter where you draw it as long as it is parallel to this center front edge of the facing. And then this will be my new grain line. And now I can extend the piece the length that I need. So I'm just going to do it in chunks, the midriff first, right? So I'm going to start from the bottom here, and then I'm going to, it's very important that your line is exactly parallel to, that you're continuing this line straight. Okay, so I like to have a couple inches of my ruler aligned here. If you start down here, it's easy to get slightly off, but if you have a couple inches aligned with the center front, then you know you're going to be on a good path down here. So I'm just going to draw. I know I'm going to need to, like we said, it's almost 50 inches, so you're going to have to keep going at some point. And then same thing on the other side. The facing is 2 inches wide total, which is very convenient for our ruler width here. And I'm going to measure 5¼ down here. And same on the other side. And you can see I've already messed this up because it's starting to get wider down here. And this happens to me all the time. It's way harder than you would imagine to draw two parallel lines that are the exact distance apart that you need them to be. So if you see this starting to happen, you need to fix it and you need to make sure that they're exactly 2 inches apart, right? So from here down, I can use the width of my ruler to correct myself, all right? Like so, and then just get rid of that one. All right, so I'm gonna keep going, 5 1/4 added from there, and then I need to add my 49 3/4 from there down. So I'm just gonna continue adding paper as I need to and taping it together until I have a facing that's the entire length that I need. Okay, so I'm gonna keep working on this. You're gonna do yours, and then we'll come back and talk about how to draft the zipper guard. Okay, so the final pattern thing we need to do is to draft the pattern for the zipper guard. Now, if a zipper guard is just a usually rectangular piece that goes inside a garment to protect your skin from getting caught in the zipper, which, as you could imagine, is especially important for a robe, right? So what we're going to be doing is drafting essentially a rectangle, but you need to know the dimensions you're gonna want, right? So if you've sewn our Maryland jeans, you've sewn a zipper guard before. It's usually, it's cut the whole piece and then you fold it, right? And so there's a fold on the inside and then the 2 seam allowances get sewn next to the zipper teeth. I'm gonna show you how to sew it, so don't worry. But for now, what you need to know is that the length of this rectangle needs to be the length of your zipper plus a seam allowance at the top and at the bottom, okay? So I'm gonna be using a 20-inch long zipper, and then I need 5/8 of an inch at the top and 5/8 of an inch at the bottom. Now it's handy to know that 5/8 of an inch times 2 is 1 1/4 inches, right? So I'm going to make my length 21 1/4 inches. So I'm using this bigger ruler now. You saw how hard it was for me to draw a right angle in the last little chapter. So if you have something a little bit bigger than the 2x18, this can be handy, even if you just have like a book or something with a right angle. Sometimes that can help get you started a little bit better. Okay, so I'm going to just start by getting my right angle and the length that I need. So this pattern making paper can be handy for this too, because I can align the edge of my ruler with the little crosses and I know that I am drawing a straight line. So I'm gonna draw my right angle at the top. I'm gonna draw down here and I'm going to mark, I'm gonna give myself a little slash mark at 21 1/4. Okay, so next let's talk about the width of this zipper guard. I decided on 1 1/4 inch finished width for mine, okay? So I just kind of came up with that number. It seemed like something that wouldn't be too wide or too narrow. The important thing is that it's going to be wide enough that you can zip over it and it, will protect your skin below it. So whatever width you want, go for it. I'm gonna go with 1 1/4 inch. Now, like we just said, it's 1 1/4 inch finished, but it gets folded. So we actually need to account for double that width, all right? So 1 1/4 inch times 2 is 2.5, right? But then we need to add seam allowances on the long edges. So 2.5 plus 1 1/4 inch for those seam allowances brings us to 3 3/4 inches. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now, I have this nice straight line. I'm going to extend over the top. 1, 2, 3 3/4 is right here. And now I'm going to draw my parallel line. And I'm being very careful that I'm actually making a rectangle and not a weird trapezoid. Ooh, it's a very squeaky pencil. Drawing down to the bottom here. Looks pretty good. And here's where I made my slash mark for my length. And now I am going to just, I'm going to draw a line across the bottom. And look at me, it's actually 3 3/4 inches at the bottom. So if you want to check yourself, you don't think you made a perfect rectangle with right angles, you can measure the distance at the bottom, and mine is 3 3/4 as it should be. So hurrah. I am now going to draw a straight line across the bottom. And the final thing that you can do is you can draw a line down the center. I'm realizing now that that would mean I would have to divide 3/4 by half. So instead, probably what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna cut this out. I'm gonna fold the piece in two and then draw my fold line down the center. So let's do that real quick, and then this piece will be made. And the grain line, because this is a rectangle, the grain line will be parallel with either of these long edges or with the fold line we're going to make. Okay, so here's my zipper guard piece. Like I said, I'm going to fold it lengthwise so I don't have to do any more math. All right, so that crease down the center will be where it gets folded as we sew it. And you can also use this fold line as your grain line. Now we're going to label everything. Every time you make a new pattern piece, you want to label it more than you think you need to, because you think you're going to remember what it is, but you never do. You're like, what's this rectangle? And then you throw it in the trash. So we want to make sure we have fold line here, and we can also put grain as well. And then I'm going to label it Society Robe Zipper Guard. And then you can give yourself cutting instructions here too. We are going to cut one fabric and cut one interfacing. All right, so those are your cutting instructions, and that's it for your pattern pieces. Next thing you're going to do is cut everything out as you normally would. Add any sparkly layers that you want to. Those would be underlined with the terry or whatever you're using underneath it. Now, the one thing I will say is the power mesh that we used in the midriff front of the dress, that is now optional, I would say. We are going to omit it because we do have the rhinestone layer that's going to act as a little bit of a stabilizer, so I don't feel like I'm going to need that extra layer of power mesh. If you do want some stability in your midriff front, you could still add that power mesh layer, there we go, I got it, or a layer of stretch interfacing or something like that. Okay, so go cut everything out, and then we'll be back and we'll be working on our sewing. Okay, so we're looking at the front of the robe. The midriff is sewn with the rhinestone overlay, and I have already stabilized my center front zipper opening just where the zipper is going to go, so the length of the zipper. So on both sides there. And you also want to check and make sure that you have your circle mark, which is at the V-neck on the front, 5/8 of an inch in, because that's going to help us place our zipper. Okay, so grab your zipper now, and the way we're going to place this may feel a little unusual if you're used to regular separated or lap zippers. So what you're going to do is you're going to open it up, and then we're starting with the left side. So you're going to turn it upside down. So now the teeth are facing the side seam of the garment. And you're going to find that circle mark again and place the top metal stop of the zipper just underneath that circle mark. So about 1/8 of an inch. Give yourself just a little bit of clearance between the circle mark and the metal stop. And now you really need to carefully place your zipper from the edge. What's going to happen is that the teeth are going to be exposed when we sew this on. So your stitching is going to be at 5/8 of an inch, and then there's the teeth. So what I'm doing here is I know that my teeth are 1/8 of an inch wide, plus my 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So that equals 3/4 of an inch. So I'm taking my ruler and I'm measuring from the raw edge of the opening to the edge of the teeth. And that should measure 3/4 of an inch. And yeah, like you see I'm doing here, just spend some time making sure that your zipper is situated exactly where you want it. And measuring is really important with this because you can't sew over these zipper teeth or you will break your needle. So you want to be sure that you're 3/4 of an inch in, like I am. And then I'm pinning all the way down the center of the tape. And what we're going to do next is we're going to baste up the center of the tape. So I'm going to use a long basting stitch to stitch up the tape. And for now, we're just doing a first pass, so you don't have to be too close to the teeth, just kind of up the center of the tape. Okay, and you can see I'm using a zipper foot just to make sure that I don't stitch too close to the teeth and break a needle, and just stitching all the way up the tape. Okay, so I have one side of the zipper basted on, and it's eventually going to look like this with just the teeth exposed once the seam allowances are turned in. But now we're going to focus on the other side. So you can first place these seam allowances. So you see how I've stabilized this opening on both sides, and now we want to make sure that the seams are going to match on both sides of the opening. So what I'm doing here is I'm closing the zipper. I'm struggling with it a little bit. The zipper was very new and a little bit cumbersome at times. So I did get it closed. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to match the seam allowances on both sides. And you may have seen me use this method before. I definitely did it on the Rita blouse when we did an invisible zipper and we had to match the midriff seam. What you're going to do is you're going to make a mark on the zipper tape at the seam lines. So this is what it's going to look like once it's matched. And I'm going to make a couple marks to help myself match those seam lines. So I'm taking a disappearing ink marker, and then on the zipper tape on the right side where we haven't stitched yet, I'm making a mark where it matches the midriff seam line at the top and at the bottom. So I'm just coming straight over to the zipper tape from that seam line and making just a little slash mark. And now I'm going to transfer those marks to the underside of the zipper tape because we have to turn the tape over to place it. So just make sure you have the marks on the underside as well. And now we are going to open up that zipper and turn it over just like you did with the first side. It's going to be upside down, and also the zipper teeth are going to be facing outward, so facing the side seam. So now you're going to match those little marks to the midriff seams. So, and remember that you want to be matching them at the 5/8 of an inch seam line, not at the edge. So you're going to have to match those marks and then also simultaneously make sure that you are 3/4 of an inch in from the edge of the zipper teeth to the raw edge of the zipper opening. And you want those marks to match the seam lines on the midriff. And really take your time on measuring when you're placing the zipper. And then I'm going to pin the midriff area only for now. And now I'm just going to do a test. Once you have it pinned in there, you can close your zipper just to make sure that those seam lines are matching the way that they're supposed to after you did all that marking. Okay, so I can see here that my seam lines are matching well, and so now I'm good to pin the rest of the zipper tape. So just like we did with the first side, you're going to pin all the way down the tape. Okay, so pin all the way down, and what you can do is you can actually separate the zipper at the bottom just so that it's easier to sew once you get to the bottom of the tape. All right, so now we're ready to sew the zipper guard. So you're going to grab that rectangle that we cut, and I've already interfaced this. And now you're going to fold it in half, right sides together, lengthwise. And we're going to pin and stitch just at these short ends. You can pin those, and then we will be stitching this at 5/8 of an inch. So now I am trimming away the seam allowances and the bulk from the corners on those short ends that I just sewed. And now let's turn this right side out, the short ends, and I'm going to press this. So matching up the raw edges on the long side, I'm pressing this piece flat with the wrong sides together. And next you're going to pin the open edge shut, that long open edge. You're going to pin that, and next I'm going to baste it closed at 1/2 inch. All right, so now you're going to place your zipper guard, and it goes on the left side of the robe as you're wearing it. Okay, so it gets layered over the zipper that we basted on. And you want to be really careful about how you place the top of it. The finished upper edge of the zipper guard should go right at the circle mark. So, in other words, where your zipper ends or just above it. And now we're going to match the raw edges and then pin it in place. And so you can see, I'm just showing you how it's going to look when you wear it. The guard is going to form this sort of like underlap so that the zipper doesn't get caught in your skin when you close it. All right, so I'm going to keep pinning it, and I'm matching at the bottom. So the zipper guard ends where the zipper ends as well. And just fill in some pins in between. And now the next thing I'm going to do is baste at 1/2 inch. Okay, so you can see when the facing is stitched on and everything's turned out, how nice it's going to look. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just trim away any excess rhinestones in between the layers in the seam allowance, because I don't want to have a double layer of rhinestones when I go to stitch the zipper in place. Okay, so first things first, you are going to want to sew the shoulder seams on your facing units. So sew the back neck facing to the front facings, these long, long pieces, and press the seam allowances open. So now you have one big facing unit. And now we're going to start pinning the facing to the robe around the neckline and the robe front. You want to match the seams on the facing to the yoke seams on the robe where your hood is inserted, if your robe has a hood. And I'm going to just keep pinning all the way around. Your only real match point is those seams at the yoke. And then your front neckline. Make sure you match that little pivot point where the circle is, right here. And the facing is getting layered over the zipper guard. So you're going to have a bunch of layers here to deal with. It does get quite thick here, especially in this terry fabric. But I'm going to keep pinning all the way down through all these layers. And I know these pieces are getting really big and hard to show you on the screen, so I'm just going to show you the hem here. You're going to be pinning all the way down to the hem of the robe, and in this case, this is a floor length one. So here's what it looks like at the bottom. And I'm just going to fill in pins and then stitch all the way from one hem all the way around the neckline to the opposite side of the hem. Okay, so I sewed all the way around and then graded my seam allowances just to reduce some of the bulk in here. So you are going to want to grade it so that the facing is the shortest seam allowance and then the robe is the longer one. And then when you turn the facing in, you'll see you just have the zipper teeth exposed. And then the final thing we're going to do is we're going to edge stitch along the zipper opening. Okay, so you can see that I edge stitched through all the layers at just the zipper opening. And it was pretty tricky with these rhinestones, so be very careful and take it slow if you have rhinestone fabric, because you will break some needles. And then instead of edge stitching around the rest of the opening, I understitched as you usually would. So I only have visible stitching around the zipper. And there it is. All right, everyone, that is your Society Robe. I hope you have loved learning how to hack the Society dress pattern to make this glamorous old Hollywood inspired robe. Now remember, we're gonna keep doing this hack series over the course of the year. And they're going to get progressively more complex. So if you like what you learned today and you're interested to learn more about pattern hacks and pattern drafting, keep watching this series. We're going to have some really fun stuff in store. And thank you all so much, especially for being princesses and inner circle members here at the Society of Charm. I cannot wait to see what you make with this hack, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.